Good morning. This is Michelle Markey with Kauffman FastTrac. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our monthly FastTrac author series. We are so pleased this morning to welcome one of our friends and our colleagues, actually, Bruce Mancinelli, author of 50 Ways to Love Your Startup. Let me count the ways. Bruce, we thought this would be an amazing opportunity, not only for you to get your good content out there, but in the spirit of the month, we thought it would pair nicely. A bit about Bruce, just to give you an introduction. Bruce delivers 50 important ways to embrace your big idea and make it a success. In this book, Bruce challenges the reader to seize that business idea that's always been had and become the lover you've always wanted to be. Unlike a new automobile, a new startup does not come with a user guide. How to make it work, overcome problems and issues, and everything you have to do to make your startup hum and purr like a well-tuned automobile. That comes from everyday experiences and the help you can get along the way from others who've gone before you. 50 Ways to Love Your Startup is designed to help you get started and to be some of the help you with some of the things you'll need along the way. Bruce, welcome. We're so thankful that you were able to join us.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here, and as always, to be a part of an organization that is so focused on entrepreneurship and comes alongside the partner kind of role that is so needed in the startup world. So I'm pleased to be a part of the day and a part of your organization. So, should I begin, Michelle?
Yes, please do.
So, everyone, okay, thank you. I'm sorry. So I welcome everyone that is out there, be it soon-to-be, wanna-be startup lovers, or those who are already actively, madly in love with their love of the startup and the business that they're in. And quite frankly, there may be some out there that are less in love than when they first started off. And I think what I've appreciated over the years is that this whole notion of the relationship that the founder has with their idea is in fact a relationship. And it's one that is much like the personal relationships that we develop, even to the point of this love interest that I tried to focus my book on. And so I do call it a love affair. Now, with that in mind, I'm reminded that just last Saturday, all of the focus that we normally have in a given year to the love interests of our lives comes with Valentine's that we send out, the little gifts that we make. In just a little research, I was surprised a bit to learn that it's the second most active and busiest season for sending cards, be it e-cards or even the old traditional snail mail type cards. So it's clearly an activity where we focus on those who have a special part in our lives in the form of relationship. And so it got me to thinking, simply because my book was coming up and it has this bright red heart on it, ideally suited for the month and for Valentine's Day, if one was thinking about tweeting out their love interest, their startup, last Valentine's Day, what might they have done? And would it be different from one different type of startup lover to another? And by good fortune, doing again a little Google search here and there, I found a Technori site that had already beaten me somewhat to the punch. So I'm going to borrow from some of the things that I learned from that particular event. Now, if you're an observant startup lover, then you would recognize things as, being the common things that you see in the world of startups. We see in Valentine's cards and in everything that we do, angels, and angels transcend into the startup world, as we know. Matter of fact, increasingly the role of an angel to a startup has become even more and more important as the initial startup funds are more difficult to find, and the distance between first money and maybe first capital outside money gets further and further apart, that we look for angels to do that. you have to have a heart and you have to be in love with what you want to do if you are that observant startup lover. And you have to be steeped in red. Let's face it, more money goes into the startup in the beginning than the return pays for the startup. So the red in this particular case is financial. It's bottom line red, but the intent is to, as quickly as possible, turn that to black and make that a very, very successful enterprise. Now, if you're a realist, then you would view your tweet slightly different. I'm sure you're following along with me. And it's a little bit different in that, you're going to spend your whole day together. It's basically all about how much time you're willing to devote to this startup. And quite frankly, this is an area that I learned through the number of startups that I had, a very difficult challenge, because the startup can be as demanding as a partner may be in terms of a time commitment. And there's a need to balance, but at the same time, in the earliest stages of a startup, it's very demanding of personal time. And personal time becomes outweighed with some of the other things that are going on. I remember trying to go out for my first money with a particular company years back, and I had the interest of a particular investor, and I wasn't able to answer two critical questions at the end of my discussion. This goes back to, I'm going to say 7, 8 years ago, or right at the beginning of traction with the internet. And I remember telling this person, well, I will get that to you very, very soon. Immediately, I think I might have even said. The very next day, I sent an email. And I waited and I waited and I waited and I heard nothing back. And I eventually got the investor on the phone and I asked, gee, I sent you what you asked for. You were interested, but there was no response. And what he told me at the time was, you sent me an email and you sent it like it was the old days. We're now on internet time. And I think for the first time in my business career, I realized that my notion of time had completely gone away, and that now anymore there's immediacy about our time commitment. So that's the realist in me. For the optimist, you look at the passion, the desire. Of course, you have very little money in any kind of relation, but you have huge dreams, and the dreams are really what makes the drive for going forward, overcoming maybe the lack of that initial money that you have, but trying to take the next step. Now, if you're in that phase where you're really looking for that next major investment, there are a lot of startups these days who almost start off with that as the first quest. Difficult challenge, but VC to those people isn't Valentine's candy, it's venture capital. And trying to find venture capital is increasingly more difficult, as everybody knows out there. For the hopeless romantic, it's, roses are red, violets are blue. I'm a starter and you should be too. Basically, startup lovers believe everybody should be one. Whether they are repeating because they've not quite had the success yet, but they keep trying because there is something about that, as well as the fact that when they've succeeded, they have so much they want to share that they do it again and again and again. I mean, we call them serial entrepreneurs. Don't like that term, given Criminal Minds and some of the things that I watch on TV give me the wrong idea. But the idea that you keep doing this over and over and over again is a phenomena that comes with those types of startup lovers. For the flirtatious startup lover, be it man or woman that is at the start of the business, it's all about bootstrapping, right? I mean, you've got to do it yourself. You've got to make sure that you're able to get it going. And periodically, you've got to hire. You've got to be able to bring on the right people at the right time to make all the difference in the company. The wise startup lover says starting a business is just like a relationship. You want to make it last, so it takes a commitment, and it does take this love that I keep coming back to, and brutal honesty. It's easy to fantasize with an early stage startup. It's easy to make the numbers work. I mean, I've learned that you can make Excel do anything. So if you don't like the bottom line, change a few things, and it will improve the bottom line. But that doesn't necessarily translate and transfers over into the changes that are going on with the company. So the brutal honesty is very, very important. For the bitter lover, it's a lonely, lonely, lonely place to be the chief executive officer. The CEO becomes the chief everything officer because you have every single job when you start off as a solopreneur in the business. And for the longest time, you're doing every other job that is out there to try and make the business go. And then the classic is money can't buy me love, so I gave it all to my startup. And there are an awful lot of people who have done just that. Finally, my last thought is that those people might want to think about being surprised. The thing that I can remember the most about being in my startup world was the disappointment I had at the end of the day. Because there comes a time where you got to sleep a little, or take a little rest, or have some substance to kind of get yourself going again. But I hated to quit. I couldn't wait until the next morning in order to start all over again. And that was the way I would have tweeted back then. So I welcome everybody to February 18th. It's been a series of eventful days when you think about it. The 14th was Valentine's Day, and of course right before that, 50 Shades of Grey, a book I wish I had written, was released and certainly promoted part of Valentine's Day. And then Monday we had President's Day, and most of the 50 states celebrate that as a holiday. And then yesterday was Fat Tuesday, which isn't necessarily the end of anything. It's the start of the 40-day Lentil period. And I was struck that it is also the end of Carnival, if those of you who follow it. And I found that interesting because it is neither the start or the end of that particular period. And I think that's the way it is with every day in a startup. So I thought February 18th, what couldn't be better than to call this Let's Love Our Startup Day. And maybe we can start a tradition by making this a holiday as we go forward. To do that, I would offer this book that I wrote, which is 50 Ways to Love Your Startup, as a means of loving your startup. Now, I'd like to take pause for just a minute, because when I wrote 50 Ways to Love Your Startup, and I was deep into my word interaction, every time I used the word startup, the manner in which I spelled it, which is S-T-A-R-T-U-P, no hyphen, no space, just all run together, was an early stage usage of the word. Quite frankly, Word didn't like it. It lit up my my misspelled words almost like a draft car pole would show the red lights moving up and down. So it was interesting that in the last 3 or 4 years, that's no longer flagged as a misspelled word because we've accepted it as a standard everyday English word. It's interesting, however, that there's a difference between whether you are a startup or whether you are a small business that has just started up, or a business startup. They're not the same. Yet, the kind of things that are going to make them successful are the same. But I'd like to highlight those as being different because it's important to understand the differences, given that one is a founder of a high-tech, high-energy company of the ilk that Steve Blank defined, right? It's a temporary organization. You know, we're in transition. We're trying to hurry up to get to market. We're designed to search for that repeatable and scalable model. How fast can we achieve market awareness? How many customers can we embrace and draw into the application of the use of our product? A scalable startup has the intent, day one, to become large. Eric Ries in the Lean Startup even describes it as yet another definition that, a new product or a service under conditions of extreme uncertainty. And that defines a very different kind of group than would be the manner in which small business startups are defined. I'm just using something quoted from the SBA, Small Business Administration. A small business startup is independently owned, operated, organized for long-term profit, and not to be dominant in its field. Very different if you think in terms of that first definition that Steve Blank and Eric Ries have. A startup founder, in the first definition sense, wants to be disruptive. You hear about this disruptive market innovators, scalable and impactful. These are, these are very aggressive terms that define the kind of a business that we have. A small business startup intends to be their own boss. They're not looking to be replaced. They're not looking to necessarily bring in a big staff. They're not even looking for heavy investments that come from the venture community, which by and large changes the direction and often the composition of who's running and how the company is being run. A small business startup is looking for a secure place in a local market. So other characteristics. The startup, high-tech, high-energy, venture-backed, less bootstrapping, very scalable, fast growth. It's often high-tech and app-based. Got to be an app for that. It's temporary. It's often acquired anymore or ultimately makes it to an IPO. And it is extremely VC active. Small startup, however, very different. And I actually pulled a few statistics because I'd love to share these for just a moment in talking about how the Forbes magazine describes small business. The SBA, by the way, defines a small business as being less than 500 employees. That's a really high watermark for most businesses because there are 28 million small businesses with over 22 million that are self-employed with actually no payroll or employees. These are called non-employers. And 50% of the working population, that's 150 million individual, works in some form of a small business. Small businesses generate 65% of the net new jobs since 1995. And that's a number that's maybe shrinking a little bit, but it's still a small business, the highest contributor in terms of jobs creation. There were approximately 500 million, it's actually almost 550 billion, 543,000 new jobs created each month. But interestingly enough, more employer businesses are shutting down than are started up each month. So clearly the startups are an important component to keep the pace of business growth out there. 7 out of 10 new employers firms survive less than 2 years, half at least 5 years, third 10 years, and so on. It's interesting that 1 in 10 of the high-tech startups tends to survive. So these numbers, even on the small end, outpace those of the other. I share this because the majority of the startups are really in this latter category. It doesn't mean that you don't get the same advice or can utilize the same kind of business interests or the services of organizations like Kauffman. I think the Kauffman Foundation is one of the best at being able to see the entire world of entrepreneurship for what it is. Small business interests as well as high-tech small business interests when it first starts up. And I think that those of you who are not heavily involved or followers of Kauffman, I encourage you to start today and make this one of your very first days. Anyhow, so startup businesses have funding that's very, very different. Basically speaking, cash is needed to make a high-tech startup succeed. In the case of a small business, it's organic growth. It's a positive cash flow. How quickly can we get to the place where we're actually starting to make money? And there, instead of cash is needed, suddenly cash is king becomes the critical path to success. Now, either way, whether you're a founder of a high-tech company and startup or a startup in the small business sense, you enter into a love affair. And I think there are common characteristics that are the same, even though I've brought up all the differences. There's probably an 80-20 rule. 80% of good business is still applicable whether you're in one category or the other. And it starts with the match. Like any other relationship that you all have in your lives or in everything that you do, it has to be a good match. From the founder to the idea, from the founder and the team, and everything that goes interactive to that, the match is an important component. Commitment, it takes a lot of time and effort and emotion to keep a good relationship going. I know this because I, in December, celebrated not quite my 50th, but my 40th wedding anniversary. And I look back on that and just reflect on the fact that it is hard work. There are a lot of ups and downs. There are times for better, for worse. And we say that in the vows that we have. And we say that and should say that with startups that we have. It takes dedication like one has never seen before. It has to be a focus, and it has to be a true dedication. You can't do a relationship part-time. It just doesn't work. And a business idea done part-time just will not succeed. It just takes too long, or it just doesn't have the right energy and the right dedication to make it successful. There will be good and there will be bad times. Again, for the richer or for poorer, in sickness and in health, there are many, many highs and lows, and we must recognize that, whether you're in that high-tech world or whether you're in a small business startup. You have to have a plan, and you have to work it. This is, for a lot of people, a difficult thing because relationships often immediately start into the doing without having taken enough time to plan or to work a given plan. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. It takes getting good advice. I think it's always great before one makes a long-term commitment to a personal relationship to seek out professionals, whether that be a pastor in a church or friends or individuals to try and get good advice before making permanent decisions. The same thing is true in the business world. There are a lot of great sources, but the best sources will come from individuals who have been there, understand it, are professionals in the trade, and who are willing to come alongside and provide assistance. It's going to take others and you, and you know what? In a startup world, we tend to call our employees early on family, and we continue to think that way, where it is clearly very much a relationship. It's going to take a budget, and the rule of thumb, as I've learned through the 7 companies I've had, both good and misfortune in experiencing, it always takes twice as long, costs twice as much as what estimates are. It seems like a negative way to look at it, but you have to be prepared for the surprises that come with budget and cash and time delays and things. And then finally, there should be an exit plan. I'm not suggesting that every business should start with a, some sort of a plan to get out, but I think it's always sensitive and wise to be thinking that at a certain point in time, it may be appropriate to either be acquired or to sell, or for the fortunate, to possibly go out with an initial public offering. And it really requires having good records, having created a discipline along the way in a manner in which that addressing things like due diligence, which is a very active part in the venture capital marketplace when you're trying to capture those funds, you're going to be given a ton of documents and requests that are going to look at the business from every angle. And doing that early on with the notion that that's part of the plan is an important thing to do. So this book that I wrote, one, why did I write it? It started when I was approached by a local newspaper who, I was running a business incubator in the Northern Virginia area, and this newspaper wanted to know, is it easier to start a business today than it was, and I guess because I'd done it a number of times, than it was when I first started my first startup, or second or third for that matter. And I was just absolutely blown away with how much had changed when I was looking at the perspective of cost and time. You know, I forgot that when the internet came about, we used a term called disintermediation. We eliminated, as disintermediation suggests, time and distance and cost to a large measure. Everything was immediate. And with the immediacy and technology and the internet and our ability to get to market, it was a fraction of the cost to start a business than it was. And as I did that, it prompted another article and another article, and actually these started to become longer articles that I turned into chapters. And before I knew it, I had 50 of these things that came to become the book. The title itself came from my love of Paul Simon's songs, because I went to Google 50 ways, and before I had a chance to finish the Google search bar, 50 ways to leave your lover actually came on the screen. One of my favorite songs. I'll digress here for a moment. Paul Simon, at the time he wrote this particular song, was no longer Simon and Garfunkel. Those of you who have followed that career of those particular singers, I consider Paul Simon one of the greatest songwriters of our time. But they had broken off. They were no longer a team, so to speak. So in many regards, Paul Simon was starting up again. His career wasn't doing all that well, because he did really fabulously as Simon and Garfunkel. The other thing was he was coming out of a divorce. And he wrote this song largely prompted from that. And the song went, 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover. So I was curious, and in looking at the chorus, for those of you who aren't familiar with the song, you get things like slip out the back, Jack, make a new plan, Stan. You don't need to be coy, Roy. Hop on the bus, Gus. Just drop off the key, Lee. And you know, that's 5 reasons or 5 ways to leave your lover. I always thought, what a disappointment. Never understood the reason for the 50 ways. Even the chorus repeated doesn't get you to 50 ways. So I said to myself, you know what? I'm going to do better than that. I'm going to actually deliver on the title of the book. Now, it's a big book, 404 pages or thereabouts. So it is not a book you just sit down and fly through. It's not what I'd call a beach book. It is a reference book. But it's designed to be fun and light to read. It's got cartoons that I'm told, at least by my, when I wrote the book, my daughters that were in their late teens and early 20s, that was the best part of the book. Good national cartoonists who helped apply some of the cartoons specific to the chapters. So I think it's a reference book that you pick up when you need some added guidance in a particular area. And what I've tried to do for today is to take essentially what are the general areas that my entire book covers. And I'm just going to share those with you for a little bit, and it's going to get back to the plan thing that I mentioned earlier. But the idea is still pretty important. And the purpose. Does it really solve a problem, this idea that you have for a startup or a new business? Does it even fill a need? Now, it can be bigger, better, or faster than something that already exists, but somehow being different is more important because it's difficult to be a Me Too type solution. So the idea has to be fresh, new. It has to really engage in many ways. It has to catch a person's fancy. You have to have a plan. Now, there's a big debate about this, you know. Oh, the naysayers of a business plan. I'm not suggesting that a 200-page MBA-oriented or ancient approach to business plans are necessary, but I do believe you have to have a plan. And whether or not it's a short plan, if you don't have time to write a 1 to 10-page plan about your business, I'm not so sure you're ready for that business. Because whatever the plan is going to be, it's got to be your daily and ongoing target because you got to plan for the business. It's just that simple. And there will be changes. We will have to make modifications. This is what pivots come from, and changes in direction. But that is still a very important part. The business entity, what kind of a legal structure are you going to be? What are the tax implications? What accounting issues may be involved? These are all important, and they're complex. The pros and cons to whatever organizational structure one chooses, or however someone is going to file their individual taxes. And I've learned that this is a pretty complex area, and advice from a lawyer or dependable source who is well aware in this field, as well as an accountant or a CPA, is really critical here, and I think it's something I would recommend. You have to think about the team. When you're a startup, you're basically on a bus and you're the bus driver. You're the only one on, and you're going to get it started, you're going to start it up, and you're going to decide where you're going. And along the way, you're going to stop and ask others on to the bus. And you have to be very selective about who's going to get on the bus, because at a certain point in time, the goal to a founder, to a startup person, is ultimately to have the business so successful they no longer are the lead bus driver. They can step off the bus, if you will, and watch the organization operate on its own. So who's on the bus is important, and who's driving remains important throughout that entire process. The market, the size, target group, segmentation, initial customers, we know all about this. This is the aspect of lean startup that I like a lot, because I can remember in many stages in preparing for some of the businesses that I was involved with, we spent way too much time in the office analyzing numbers and getting statistics together and presenting these really powerful documents about how we were going to capture so much of a market at whatever percentage over the course of the years, and we almost never went out and asked anyone if they were part of that market or if we were right about our target and focus group. So getting out of the building, getting out of the office, and engaging the customer or the potential community customer base as early as possible, I think, is a critical component. The name. Now, it used to be super important to have a great name. It's become even now more critical than ever, because it's the most repeatable thing about a business. Whether it is in the company name or in the website URL name, it has to be unique. It has to be memorable. It has to communicate to some degree what the business is about. And now, increasingly more difficult than ever, it has to be available. And this is a very important thing to consider, more important than ever before, because in the world of the internet and virtual, this is what is so challenging to come up with. So the www.whatgoeshere.com is something you got to spend a lot of time on and be happy with, that goes along with the company name. The debut, what's the go-to-market strategy? How are we going to create the buzz? How are we going to go out, reach out, and capture the interest of the marketplace as quickly as we can? Financing, let's face it, getting paid or paying a customer or paying our suppliers and everything else, very important. Taxes, accounting, everything about that. I put getting paid on here because I think all too often we believe that that shouldn't be a component. I've always been a big believer, especially as a mentor to small startups and startup businesses as a whole, is that you got to start earning enough money to be able to pay the people in the company, not just the folks you bring on board. Not everybody will stay for sweat equity, but also for the founder itself. So I think that's an important. You have to figure out whether you're a know-it-all or whether or not advisors, the been there, done that crowd, is something that you need. I would suggest that no one is a know-it-all. Things will come up all the time, and that is kind of a fluid way of learning about your startup, because the whole process is fluid. And you want to listen to those who have been there, gone before you, or have insights that you might not have. And this is, your pivots world again. And then finally, that emergency exit, whether that's an equity exit or what I also would consider to be a succession strategy. All too many businesses just run for the sake of running, and they haven't really given this some thought. And they overlook the best time or the best opportunity to maximize the investments that have been made. So I'd like to think that my book covers all of that material. But if I was to engage Paul Simon one more time, and I'd ask him to write a song entitled 50 Ways to Love Your Startup, we already know that Paul Simon's course could only have 5 lines in it. So I've come up with the 5 what I consider to be overarching, maybe all-encompassing categories that one needs to focus on. And the course would simply say, don't make it a crime, it's about time. Time management skills. It's tough to be focused and dedicated in today's world when we lead such interrupt-driven lives. Cell phones, sound, texts are after our attention. We are tweeting. We are doing everything but staying focused in some cases. And so the management of time is something that is becoming increasingly more difficult. I don't know how many rabbit holes I get into when I click on a link, and an hour and a half later I can't remember how I got there. And many of us are there and do that all too often. And when you're in a startup world, you've got to be focused and prioritize tasks, and you have to just make sure that the job is getting done about starting the business. And then you have to balance that time with personal time. So the second course to that line would be, don't make it funny, it's about money. There is at no point a startup that shouldn't be thinking about the money aspect. It doesn't matter what it is. Even startups have to be thinking about the cost of the operations and donations. And, we call it different things, but it's still about money at the end of the day. And it is the ultimate survival link to any and all businesses. Those who plan and manage that phase of the business best are the ones that invariably exit with successes and succeed and go on to achieve the goals that they had. Don't be a dunce. It's all about patience. I've just got to tell you that it takes a long time in some cases to get where you really want to go. In today's world, we think it's overnight. But when I tell you that statistics that say 1 in 10 of these tech startups, and gosh, that says 90% don't make it out of the first 4 months because they didn't get funding or because the idea wasn't flushed out or whatever the case, it's the rush to try and get someplace when maybe it was still a great idea, but there wasn't enough patience played into the equation. So I think patience is an aspect that goes into it. Another line would be, don't besmirch. It's all about research. You cannot get enough information. And in today's world, we have more opportunity and more ways to get our arms around numbers and research and meaningful information. I would strongly, strongly, again, recommend those who are not Kauffman followers to be aware of all the materials and all the support services that Kauffman offers to the entrepreneurs in a startup capacity. And then finally, a plan for the long span. It's all about the plan. I get back to this plan aspect. I used to think that you didn't need a business plan anymore because I read enough articles where a lot of people kind of kind of disavow some of the needs for that. But I don't hear a lot of successful companies who went that route. I still see the companies that plan their operation, who focus on their businesses, are the ones that emerge and become successful when they come out of all of it. So that's it. That's 50 ways to love your startup in 35, 40 minutes or thereabouts. For you all, I thank you for the memories. This has been a really, really fun exercise for me because I had to go back and reread aspects of my book. And I was encouraged to to find that it wasn't as dated as I thought it might be. You always worry about writing a book, especially when you write it about real-time events, that all of a sudden its shelf life would go away. But I would encourage you to think about the 80-20 rule. 80% of what has made all businesses successful over time continues to be the same 80% when done and properly focused. As the introduction indicated, I'm a facilitator and a program manager for the Kauffman FastTrac programs. I can't speak enough good things about the FastTrac programs for the tech venture guy, for the small business startups that are in their first or second year, or for the new venture, small business or tech venture type person. FastTrac programs are oriented to each one of those areas. And I'm disappointed that I didn't have those when I first started out, because I think I could have been that much more successful. So I encourage you to look into those, follow the guidance of those particular things. I'll be thrilled if you buy my book, and I'm more than happy to handle a question or two at this point. Thank you.
Bruce, thank you so much. That was an amazing webcast, and I appreciate it. We do have a few questions, and actually you elaborated on a few of them, but maybe you could speak a little bit more because these are a little broad. Let me start by just stepping back a little bit about a topic you talked about at the beginning, with sort of the differences between the startup founder that is looking for something that's probably really more high growth and very scalable and disruptive versus a small business startup that's, you know, is going to be making their way in the world, and they're going to be independent and very successful, but they're really not focused on being the next Facebook. And I think we believe that there are that spectrum of entrepreneurs too, and that there's a lot of different ways to define success. So one is not more successful than the other, it's just different. So with that in mind, you spoke to this a little bit, but I'm going to start at the back end. What advice would you give to a new entrepreneur who maybe hasn't even launched yet, and you start talking to them about thinking what their exit strategy might be? You know, when we bring that up, sometimes their eyeballs get really big. So what kind of advice would you give them? What can you share with them that would let the group understand why having a thought about exit may be an important part of your startup strategy?
I think that's a great question. I think I might have made note that when I mentor and I ask people to begin to identify, many of whom have not come up with kind of an exit strategy, they're a little bit taken back, and yet when you walk them through and tell them, if you're doing this without an end goal, why are you doing it? And think of the exit strategy, if nothing else, as being an end goal. You know, if all I wanted to do was to, Facebook's end goal was to make everybody a Facebook user, and then in time, a business model followed that. I mean, that in many ways could have been thought of as an exit strategy, but they evolved to that. I really think it's important to think in terms of defining early on an exit plan with a shorter time frame than might be ultimately the actual exit plan that a particular person may have about doing their startup. And what I'm saying there is, I think an exit plan will evolve as well. And so I think early on, setting the goals or the milestones. I mean, we think of starting a business as almost like starting a trip. And we, you know, when we plan a trip, we do generally set milestones along the way to chart our progress. And ultimately, we get to our destination, wherever that may be. And I think the same kind of a mindset needs to be put into play for anyone who is either just planning, thinking, toying with the idea. Now, I also think that part of the goals, if you will, that should be incorporated in an exit plan or a sense of success, because you mentioned exit would measure the ultimate success of an organization. But I'm increasingly finding, and I'm really thankful to see this, but more and more businesses are as equally worried or are focused in the area of giving back, and I love that aspect of it. I think you have to have a heart to love your startup, but the company has to have a heart for what it does and how it gives back to the local community, or how it rewards along the way its successes that have come from the support that it's gotten from others. And I think that should also be inherently incorporated in some sort of an exit or a progression and evolutionary plan that might ultimately deem the company to be in an exit point or be done with what they're doing. I think it's interesting that you know, at a certain point in time, the bus driver has to get off the bus because somebody is better suited for driving the bus, however big it's gotten at that point, yeah, to the next destination. And I think that's a good goal, too.
I think sometimes, and this is just simply an analogy, but looking at your exit strategy is much like your retirement planning, right? At 20, you're not looking at retiring necessarily at 25, but let's just say maybe at 55 or 60, and so you know that's your goal, and so you're working throughout your career to add value to your retirement fund so that you're able to achieve that goal, and to your point, have enough wealth built that you can have some charitable purpose along the way as well. So I think there's some interesting parallels on a personal kind of a personal front, if you will. I know that we are seeing really a lot of a passion around the social aspect of business, just as you mentioned. So kind of the doing well by doing good kind of aspect. So
right.
It's right. Certainly a prevalent trend in the U.S. right now. A second question that we had was actually a little bit separate, but somebody was wondering if you could elaborate maybe just a bit more on some of the pitfalls of these. A lot of these folks are probably starting off as solo entrepreneurs, and right. As they look at growing, whether they're going to be a micro enterprise or a small business or something that's even more scalable, they're going to have to add additional resources. Resources could be inventory, it could be infrastructure, it could be human resources. So on the human resources side, any words of wisdom on how to go about that? We have some content in Founders Dilemmas on that, but any words to the wise you could give on how to build an appropriate team, if you will? Yeah.
I mean, it's I think back on my own individual successes within companies, and I so very quickly realized that there are major skill sets and talents that I just really did not have. And I think it's good to come to that realization as early as possible, because that's the manner in which a successful team is going to be put together, and that is the strengths of individuals who are allowed to apply their individual talents in a complement. In maybe a funny way of describing that, but that I've often described my initial team of employees, the core nucleus, whether that was 2 or 3 or 4 or 5, whatever the number might have been as I was growing it up, but the whole of the team really kind of created a whole person, because no individual person had the talents or was that whole person independently. And I think the complement to bringing in and then being able to convey and to impart and to have that person embrace the passion that's behind the company is the difference between a very exciting early startup time frame and an effective use of the people that are brought on board. Excellent. Over time, you lose control of that too, because people will be hiring other people, but the initial handful that are going to be there. As it relates to inventory and as it relates to those types of things, the caution that I have there is, quite frankly, you're back to the cash on hand,
right,
or the make no investment unless you're able to afford it financially. As just getting way ahead of the money is a really, really kissing death troll that goes on in too many companies. The hurry up and get there without having the financial supply line
sure,
that's going to support it. So I think complementary talent on the human resources side that come together to create, a greater whole, and on the operational side, just having the right finances. So, it's spend carefully, it's spend wisely, but it is spend. And I think that's important. You can hold on to too much cash in the early stages. So there is that balance of spending it wisely and doing it at the right time, but also doing it when you have it.
Excellent. Okay, I have two more questions, and I really want to make sure to kind of get them both in because I think they're interesting. And so I'm going to start with Ben, and then David, I'll come to yours secondarily. So Bruce, Ben is from Kenya, and he's wondering whether the definition of a small business would apply in their case down there. A business with 500 employees is really large. Where would he fail as he has only 5 employees?
Yeah, actually, I think I might have, I don't want to play that small business number too casually, but that's in the United States, that's the Small Business Administration's definition, broadly spoken, of a small business is less than 500. 5 is probably closer to where you've got most businesses. As a matter of fact, if you go back to the numbers that I shared in the statistics that I found in a 2013-2014 article from Forbes, it was that, better than almost approaching half of the businesses out there are non-employers or just solopreneurs, which I think means that if you have 5, you're still very much of a small business. I can't speak to the actual market climate or the finances or the acceptance of social media or some of the things that I'm very, very familiar with here in the United States in another part of the world, because I've not launched companies there. So I would say that as long as the characteristics, if you will, of what makes a small business successful in the market as we define it here in the United States has some characteristics that are the same in other parts of the world, then I'd say, the same advice is going to be used for growing a company when you're 5 employees, or by good fortune, if you ever get to be 500 employees, even though at that point the business will be doing itself, be managing itself along the way. Be very honest with you, there are a lot of places in the world. I've been mentoring a few international startup folks. I'll mention one, and that is in the Soviet area and in the Ukraine. Venture capital is not what we know venture capital to be here in this country. It is so different, it's scary. I wish I knew more about that market to give a more definitive answer, but I would say what it takes to be successful running a business with 5 employees or 500, I think still reverts back in parts to that 80-20 rule. The same things that have always worked in good business: sound business practice, wise decisions, cash management, planning, the right kind of research and focus and things of that sort will make that 5-employee company as successful as the 500-employee company.
Perfect. Thank you. Now we have a question from David. David's question is, as a current business owner, how do you grow beyond your comfort zone? How do we go beyond, or go to the next step, or beyond the next step?
Right. That's a good question. You know, in the business world, we sometimes use, and you'll hear this in the venture capital world, because they consider this the kiss of death, and they don't want to hear that a business is a lifestyle business, because what they want is a person to always be on that bleeding edge of the next highest achievement and the maximum payback kind of thing. And so there's a balance between a lifestyle that is comfortable, I'll use that as the term in David's question, and the one that says, I'm going to risk some of the comfort that I have for stepping outside of the box, so to speak. I mean, that's what causes, you know, the not small growth, but the true incremental growth. Whether that be that scalable business that grows very, very fast, or that business that grows from whatever it was today to 25% or 30% or some larger number. Because you have to get out of the comfort zone to some measure to be able to grow a business more than just a few percentage points each and every year. The cost of running the business, employee salaries, benefits, all of that is going to increase. And so the percentage of growth at a certain point in time has to force you out of what has been predictable, which is what comfortable is, what is likely to be measurable, because that's what comfort is, that will demonstrate that a company is going to take that next step to growth in their company. And I know that's scary, but that's the risk that comes with being an entrepreneur, and being an entrepreneur that gets rewarded for having taken that risk.
Perfect. Bruce, thank you so much. This has been, I think, an absolutely wonderful webinar, and we appreciate the time and effort and the information, frankly, that you were able to share with us. So we're thrilled to have had you, and I applaud you for all your hard work here.
No, thank you very much again for the invitation. I thank all those who were in attendance during the webinar. I wish every single one the absolute maximum successes in their endeavors, wherever their startup may be or plan to be. I'll be thrilled if I ever hear back from some folks that my book had a part in their success. I know it will come from hard work and dedication. I want to reiterate, this is the free ad for the Kauffman Foundation. Don't forget them. They're a very, very important part of success for entrepreneurship throughout the United States and the world, for that matter. And I love what they do. And I thank you very much for today.
Thank you. Let me tell the rest of you as well about our author series next month that we're really looking forward to as well. Much like Bruce brought an area of expertise, next month we are thrilled to be welcoming Ted Coyne and Mark Babbitt. And their book is called A World Gone Social, How Companies Must Adapt to Survive. Just like the meteor that likely precipitated the end of the dinosaurs, social media is having a monumental impact on the world's economy, a change so dramatic that it's created a new business era. So welcome to the social age. I will tell you that this book was rated one of the best books of 2014. And if you don't follow Mark Babbitt and Ted Coyne on social media, specifically on Twitter, you may choose to do that. They're very engaging, and it would be an interesting month ahead as you look forward to listening to them. Just to, again, reiterate, the next author series, it will be held on March 18th at 10 o'clock Central, just like it was today, from 10 o'clock to 11 o'clock Central. And the book is A World Gone Social. Once again, thank you all so much for attending, and we will look forward to seeing you next month. If you're interested in the copy of this webinar, the audio and the PowerPoint slides will be up on fasttrac.org/authors within the next few days. Thanks all.